Happy Sabbath, everyone. That was a good story, wasn't it? You know, Jesus calls us all to follow him and to be fishers of men. We'll just bow our heads as we say a prayer. Dear Father in heaven, Lord, I want to thank you for your love. I want to thank you for your blessings and for life, health and strength that you give us. Just ask you to be with us as we spend time with fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. I ask that what I say, that they'll not be my words, but that they'll be your words. I just want to thank you for these things in your name. Amen. Well, I'm going to start out today with a few stories. A couple of years ago, I went on it was like a canvassing literature evangelism program over east. And I had a few pretty cool stories, so I thought I'd share a few with you. And I always remember sermons better if there's a few stories mixed in. Oh. Thanks, guys. Anyway, so I decided I had a bit of time off work for a little while, and a few of my friends over east were going on this literature evangelism program in South Queensland. So I was like, oh yeah, that could be fun. So I jumped in my car and started driving over east, and there are some photos at some point, that's all right. And so I drove over there. There was about probably 10 or 15 of us, and you'd be surprised the sort of crazy experiences you have talking to people about Christ. Like I didn't realise there's going to be this many of them, but when you go out of your way to have these sorts of conversations, it's really surprising the sort of conversations that you have with people. The first story I want to tell you guys about was North New South Wales is where we started off. We sort of worked our way north. Knocked on this door. Started talking to this lady. She was a bit friendly. I showed her like a healthy cookbook. She wasn't really into healthy food. That's fine. I showed her Great Controversy. She's like, oh, no, not interested. Thanks very much. I was like, that's no worries. I kept walking. About 2 weeks later, a couple of hours away, I knocked on another house. And guess who answered the door? The same lady. And she's looking at me and I'm looking at her. She's like, you following me? I'm like, no. Anyway, she's like, oh, show me the books again. So I showed her the cookbook. She's like, no, I'm still not really into healthy food. It's like, that's fine. So she said, what other books have you got? I showed her Steps to Christ. She's like, oh, that's pretty cool, but I don't have any money with me. I was like, oh, that's fine. I've got a little Steps to Christ. I'd just be happy to leave with you. And she said, oh, no, that's fine. It's all good. I'm not really that interested anyway. I was like, okay, that's fine. Kept going. About 2 weeks later, I was in a town called Chidlow, pretty sure that's what it's called. Knocked on this house and guess who answered the door? The same lady. And she was just tripping. She's like, come inside, you're not going to believe it. So I went inside and she said, after you left, I had this like nagging, like something pricking my conscience saying you should have taken that book, you should have taken that book. And I'm like, I've had 2 opportunities. Like the guy, he's not going to, he was in like a couple of hours away. He's not going to come knock on my door again. Anyway, she said, look, God, if you ever give me the opportunity to receive books again, I'll take it. 2 weeks later, I knock on her house and yeah, she got like 3 books. So it's just amazing. Like if you just go and you're just prepared to have conversations, like God obviously wanted her to have the book. She didn't want it, but she still got it. So praise the Lord for that. So here's some photos. So as I was driving over, I had a wheel fall off my ute. That's all right. So I drove to the edge of Victoria and then up to Queensland. You sort of take for granted not having tolls in Western Australia. They're actually pretty expensive. So this was some of the crew that we were doing it with. So these are books. We've got like a healthy plant-based cookbook. Then there's a Steps to Christ. It's got like really nice cover, big print, and then Great Controversy. So yeah, that's where we ended up, Yeppoon. It's like near Rockhampton. That was as north as I went. And I couldn't believe it, all the bats over there. Like they were just everywhere. It's wild. Yeah, so then same town, about a couple of days later, because I tend, like, when someone says no, not interested, I'm just like, no worries, that's all good. Like, I don't really want to cause any sort of conflict or push. It's just like, if they said no, that's fine. I'll go find someone else. But every now and again, like, I felt like I probably gave in just a little bit too easy. Like, I probably should have I just felt like I should have tried just a little bit more. Anyway, I was sort of praying about it, and I was going down this street, and I walked up to this house, and there was a lady cleaning the house, like a cleaner, and she's like, oh, no one's home, no thank you. I was like, oh, okay, there's no worries. So I kept walking, and as I worked my way down the street, I had like this gut feeling, I've got to go back to that house. I was like, why would I go back? She said there's no one home, like, it's fine. It's like, no, you got to go back. I was like, no, I'm not doing it. She said no, like. Anyway, I get picked up on the other end of the street, and guess where they dropped me off? On the opposite side of the road to that house to work the other street. I was like, no, I've got to go and try and go to this house. So I walk up the street, she's like, hey, I told you to leave. I'm like, oh, I just want to check with the owner quickly, I'll just be a minute. She's like, and she starts yelling at me, and I just keep walking up to the house. And knock on the door, and this guy in his 60s comes out. Friendliest guy you've ever met. I start showing him the cookbook, I show him like Steps to Christ, and he's like really interested. And I was like, oh, I actually almost didn't knock on your house because your cleaner was saying that no one's home. He's like, my cleaner. I was like, I don't know, there was some lady in your driveway in a little van like with brooms and mops, and she said no one was home. He's like, I've never had a cleaner. I was like, oh, okay. So I showed him the cookbook. He really liked the cookbook, and then I showed him the Great Controversy, and you can see something like just pricked his brain. He's like, are you a Seventh-day Adventist? I was like, yeah. He said, oh, because my mother's in the Seventh-day Adventist retirement village. She's actually was born a Catholic, but she got given this Great Controversy book and really loved it, and has been trying to convince me to read it. And I just don't, I'm not a reader, I'm not interested. And he said, but the thing is I promised my mum last Christmas, if someone else offered me the book other than her, that I'd read it. And I knocked on his door, and he's like, I'm going to read it. So it's just amazing, like, sometimes if your conscience is like pricking you, or like, you just feel impressed to do something, I think it's 100% worth doing, because you never know when God's trying to speak to you. Yeah. Well, the sermon today, it's more of a testimony than a sermon. It's about something that I went through a couple of years ago. Got a couple of photos here. So I had a car accident. It was on the 9th of August 2022. I was driving to the gym. I'll back up a little bit. So me and my brother were trying to get fit and strong and all this sort of stuff. So we're going to go to the gym. So we started going like nice and early before work. And so this particular morning I woke up, I'd slept in a little bit. I jumped out of bed and went to wake my brother up, and he just wasn't having anything to do with it. He wasn't interested. He's like, I'm not going to the gym today, because we normally went in together. And I was like, no worries, that's fine. So I jumped in my ute and was in a real rush. So I was just wearing my shorts. I had like the rest of my gym clothes on the passenger seat. I was sort of going to just get dressed when I got there. And tearing down the road, it was raining, it was hailing. It was about 5:30 in the morning. And I was, sometimes you just go through life, you don't really think about what you're doing. And I was doing about 90 k's an hour, and as I was coming around this corner down Ferguson Road, I don't know if any of you guys know that road, it looked like there was a car coming towards me with his spotlights on. And like, my little ute didn't have spotlights or anything to flash him, so I just sort of followed the white line and, squinted your eyes a bit and kept going. And then all of a sudden, bang, I hit this tree. And I actually didn't even know what I had hit. It was a fairly decent tree. Kind of as instantly as it happened, I felt like somewhere in the back of my head I knew something was going to happen, or I felt like I had seen something like a split second before it happened. I never saw the tree, but I feel like my subconscious felt like something was wrong, because just before I hit, I realised that the car wasn't actually driving towards me, it was just parked on the road. So what had happened was, in all the rain, with it being winter and the side of the road just being cut out, I guess the ground was really soft and it just fell over. And there's a guy coming the opposite direction who had seen it and put his spotlights on, thinking if he could see the tree, then with the spotlights everybody else probably could too. So when it happened, I sort of hit, and in my new little Hilux, it had like a little emergency SOS button. And I just remember trying to turn the console light, like the interior light and that, and nothing was working. I'm thinking, whatever I've hit must have been pretty bad, because I've got no lights. I tried to get out the car, but I couldn't. I remember I checked my legs, and I was like, oh, my legs are still there. I remember I was able to move, but I couldn't get out the vehicle, couldn't open the door. I tried breaking the glass, and that didn't really work that well. And then I heard this screaming, and then I was like, oh no, I've hit somebody. But I didn't know who I'd hit because I didn't see anything. And then I hear this sobbing, and this guy comes and like rips the door open. He's like, oh, you're alive. And I was like, well, I was kind of surprised because I didn't realise how bad a situation I was in, to be honest. Anyway, he's like, get out the car. So I got it. As soon as I tried to get out the car, instantly I had all this pain around like the front and around my lower back, like to the point I was all struggling to breathe. Anyway, I got out the vehicle and I was like, man, it actually really hurts. He's like, maybe you should lay down. I was like, oh, that's probably a good idea. So I lay down on the side of the road next to the ute. Yeah, this is obviously not, this is a bit later in the day. So I laid down on the ground next to the ute, and bear in mind, I was just wearing my gym shorts, no shoes, no shirt, anything yet, and it's raining and hailing, right? And I lay down, and he's like, I'm going to call the ambulance. I was like, oh, you can probably just drive me there. He's like, no, we'll call the ambulance. So he called the ambulance, and then he's like, oh, I'll call your dad, my parents. I was like, yep. So I told him the phone number, and he calls up, he's like, hi, I'm had an accident, and your son's had an accident, it's really bad. And I was like, tell him I'm okay. He's like, you're not okay. I was like, I'm okay. Anyway, so it was great. I remember laying on the road, like listening for my parents' car coming. Anyway, about an hour later, the ambulance arrived. But moral of the story is I'm totally fine. I'm all good. But when they got me to hospital, I had broken my back in 2 places. I'd crushed my L2 to 70% of its original size. I tore all the muscle ligament off my L2, both sides of it, so it was just sitting in there loose. Broken one wrist, fractured another wrist, broken 3 fingers, and I got like 25 stitches just in my hands. So it was fairly serious. But yeah, like it's pretty wild because the tray like hit the back of the cab and bounced off, and I had like a pipe rack on top of my ute full of copper because I'm a plumber, and it like went sailing down the road. So it's so lucky that there's no one parked directly opposite of me. So that was a real blessing. But when they got me into hospital, they said they gave me like I had some X-rays and things, and they realised that there was a bit of bone, like broken off fragment of bone between my spinal cord and the vertebrae, and they said, we think you're going to be paralysed because of the swelling. And I was like, I wasn't real stoked, to be honest. But eventually it worked out, they realised that there was actually no swelling because of how cold that road was, and I was out there for almost an hour and a half. All that cool just stopped it swelling. So it's amazing, eh? Like that was just, if it had happened in the middle of summer, or I had been rugged up, or it wasn't raining or hailing, that never would have happened. So when I was laying there on the road freezing, I was thinking, this sucks, but afterwards, I was like so thankful, you know? So in 2022, almost 1,200 people died in road accidents. That's a lot of people. So Princess Diana, she had a car accident and died, and she was exposed to 70 G's force. They say that she tore a pulmonary artery, which led to a heart attack. So when there's a car accident, 3 collisions occur. And if the object it hits is like immovable, like a tree or a rock or something like really big, it's obviously worse. But the first collision occurs when the vehicle hits the object, and depending on what type of object and whether it's moving towards you or standing still, influences what happens to those involved. In a crash where the car stops suddenly from hitting a tree, the kinetic energy dissipates really rapidly through the car, and the car crumples and bends. The faster the deceleration occurs, the worse things are for those which were involved in the car accident. So while the vehicle is stopping, the kinetic energy keeps the people inside the car moving at the same direction and at the same speed as the car was moving. So really, your body's moving at 100 kilometres an hour, however fast you're driving, until your body is jerked back by hitting the seatbelts, airbags, dash, whatever you end up hitting. Finally, as the shattered body comes to a halt, this is when the third collision takes place. So the first was the car hitting the tree, the second was the person hitting inside of the car, and then the third is when all your soft organs, like your spleen and liver and heart, move forward inside your body, and then they hit. They can bruise and tear. Your heart can undergo a heart attack or a rupture, and your brain can just stop working. So they say that at an accident of 60 kilometres an hour, if you were to come to an instant stop, you'd die. So there's a website you can look it up on, like you can Google like your speed, whether whatever you hit would move or not, or like the weight of it, and it calculates the G-force. So I had a bit of a look, and so I was doing about 85 to maybe a little bit over 90, and the stopping time was 17 milliseconds. So we're going from like the full speed to a stop, and it was 142 G's of force. So it was like a lot. So there's definitely, it wasn't an accident, it was 100% like a miracle. It's the equivalent of having 12.5 10 dropped on you for like, I guess, a 20th of a second. So it's really quick, but yeah, it happens super fast. So what would be like some common causes of car accidents or vehicle accidents? Speeding, distracted driving, fatigue driving, road condition, yeah, driving under the influence. These are all things which like can distract you, right, and take your concentration away, or like really alter your concentration. And you know, while being distracted while we're driving is really dangerous and can be fatal, it's not as dangerous as being distracted from our walk with Christ. So what are some common causes of separation from Christ? I realise I might have missed a couple of photos here. So this was the car when they got it back to the yard, which is a bit of a write-off. So I had 6 months off work, and then, yeah, good as new now. So that's praise the Lord for that. But so what are some common things that distract us from our relationship with God, or like just take our eyes off maybe for a bit? Too busy. Yeah, absolutely. So like work or busyness, relationships, media, routine life. And none of these things actually have to be bad things. They've just got to distract us for a little while, don't they? You know, we all know what distracts us from Christ and what gets between us and our relationship with Christ, your experience and your faith. You know, they say a great measure of faith is to not simply be willing to die for Christ, but it's to be willing to live for Christ. And I think sometimes that's the harder one. You know, in this country we have not yet been called to die for Christ, but we all have been called to live for him. You know, if we live for Jesus with all our hearts, we won't have any problem one day giving our lives for him either. Because we will have already given our lives and our hearts to him. We have already died that death to self. And that's the hardest one to give up. You know, when we come to the cross, we see that example of selflessness shown in like a really powerful way. One of my favourite authors, give me a second here, in Heavenly Places, page 62 says, heavenly intelligences are waiting to cooperate with human instrumentalities that the world may see what human beings may become through the union with the divine. Those who concentrate body, soul and spirit to God's service will constantly receive a new endowment of physical, mental and spiritual power. How powerful is that, eh? Like, it's not like God's leaving us high and dry when we go and we say, you know, help us here. He really, it says here, he gives us a constant renewal. That's pretty amazing. We are living in the very last days. Like, I don't know if you guys can see when you look around, it seems like more and more stuff's happening all the time. We've got world hunger, there's wars between Russia and Ukraine, Israel and Palestine, there's bombings all the time, terrorist attacks. Like, I don't know how many stabbings have happened in Perth just in like the last couple of months. It's really wild. They're trying to destroy marriage and the family. And COVID-19 should have really shown us how quickly things can change. They can stop you from going to church. They can stop you from food shopping, visiting your family and friends. They can lock you in your house until you stop being able to go for work. They can put economical, emotional and social pressure on you to put something in your body that you may not want to. We're living so close to that rock in Daniel 2, hitting the stone and Jesus coming. It's you can almost see it happening. So we know we're living in the last days. I guess the question is, are we ready? Our country seems to be moving downhill all the time. And it really is time for God's people to step up and let our lights shine for Him. I'd like to invite you to open your Bibles to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, verses 14 through 16. Ye are the light of the world. A city that has been set on a hill cannot be hid. Neither do men light candles and put them under a bushel, but on a candlestick, so it giveth light unto all that are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify who? Your Father which is in heaven. It is time for God's people to live their lives self-sacrificingly. And I'm not just talking about financially. I mean our lives in every way. Our talents, our prayers, our efforts, our faith, our example, our everyday. It's time to light our candles and put them for everyone to see. It seems like a lot of the time we're Seventh Day Christians, not 7-day Christians. And there's a big difference. We can look really good on Sabbath, but how are we to those around us on the other 6 days? Revelation chapter 3 verses 20 says, Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man heareth my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and sup with him and he with me. And we might say, hey, we've been hearing this sort of stuff for years, like where is Jesus, right? But the moment we say that is the moment we fulfill the prophecy in Peter chapter 3 verses 4 that says in the last days there'll be scoffers saying, where is the promise of his coming? So today we can either be scoffers or we can be believers. And I know which one I'd like to be. But I don't know about you, the weight of what's going on in the world when you think about it, it really starts to get you down a bit sometimes. You're like, this world is going down the chute, And that's why we need to lay it all at the feet of Jesus. Matthew 11:28. Come unto me, ye that are laden and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. The biggest thing that this accident has taught me, and it's taught me a lot of things, but the biggest thing it has taught me is how easily and quickly life slips away. You can be going along 1 minute, all fine and great, and then the next minute, it's changed. The only lasting joy, peace and happiness we can find is in Jesus. And we must cling to him. As I was laying on that road, waiting for my family to come, waiting for the ambulance to arrive, I was probably in a fair bit of shock. All I could think about was that morning and the morning before that, and probably quite a few mornings before that, I hadn't started my day off with Christ. I had not given my life to him. I hadn't invited him to be my Lord and Saviour. I knew that I wasn't right with him. And as I laid there looking at that tree and all the damage that was done to my ute, and my boss was incredibly forgiving. all I could think about was the fact that if I died right then, what sort of example had I been to those around me? Had I made a difference? And sadly, I really don't think the answer was I had made a big difference. You know, what example had I been to my brothers? What example had I been to my family, my friends, of what a Christian young man should be or what a Christian young man should act like? Had I been a light to those around me? Are you a light to those around you? You know, I wasn't thinking about my job or driving to the gym anymore. I wasn't thinking about my four-wheel drive or my hobbies or even lunch. I realised while laying on that road what was actually important. My relationship with Christ, my brother's relationship with Christ, my family and friends' relationship with Christ, my relationship with those around me. Had I been a light to those around me? You know, everything else is important. Those hobbies, those interests, work, earning money, it's all important. But is it getting between you and Christ? Grab hold of Christ and let us say like Jacob, I will not let you go unless you bless me. It's so important that we come to the foot of the cross every morning. You know, whatever it is that is getting between us and Christ, throw it away, remove it. It's just not worth it. Music, TV, computer, phone, video games, food, friends, social media, clamp down on it. If it gets between you and Christ, it is really not worth it. The crazy part about this story, I suppose, is that 4 or 5 days before this happened, I'd reached a crossroad in my life where I knew I had to make a decision one way or the other. I had to choose to follow Christ or I had to choose to follow Caleb. I couldn't follow both at the same time. And so I said a really simple, but it's a dangerous prayer, because if you say it, you will get a response from it, right? And it went like this. Lord, I give you my life. I give you complete and total control to do whatever it is necessary to wake me up and see my weakness and feel my need of you. And he did. He did. You know, I went from being quite confident about myself and, you know, I'm a tank, you know, you can't break me, what's the worst thing that could happen? To then, you know, 5 minutes later, I was laying on the road and was definitely not a tank, that's for sure. And I wouldn't change it for anything. I'm so thankful that happened. It was one of the hardest things that's happened to me. It was also the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. Because you see, as I was laying there next to that ute, I realised that God had given me yet another chance. I should have died, but I didn't. He gave me another chance at life. The fear I had disappeared. I felt like born afresh. Like I just was like, I can't believe I'm alive. I'm like, thank you, God. Like, this is just wild, you know. I was born afresh. I had a new beginning, a new chance to carry his cross. You know, the great thing is we don't all have to hit a tree to have that opportunity. We get that opportunity every morning. Every day we have the opportunity to choose Christ and his cross, or to choose self. And it is so easy to choose self, but there is no lasting happiness or satisfaction in it. Are you at a crossroad in your life? Do you feel yourself slipping and drifting away? You know, the world is falling apart around us, and this world is not our home. I invite you to say a dangerous prayer. John 14:13 says, if you shall ask anything in my name, I will do it. So you've got to know before saying this that if you ask it, he will deliver. Ask Christ to take control of your life, but mean it. You've got to mean it when you say it. So often we ask Christ, you know, Lord, lead us and all this sort of stuff, and then take control of my life. But then he starts to, and we're not happy with where it's going, so we grab that steering wheel and we're like, nah, come back over here. He's like, well, did you ask me to take control and lead you or not? Are we a 99% Christian or 100% Christian? Are you 99% committed or 100% committed? You've probably all heard of the Truth and Dare game. It's not the greatest game, but I've got a really good version, alright? I dare you to challenge God to wake you up and show himself to you no matter what. I dare you to get on your knees and let God show you what is standing between you and your walk and relationship with Christ. Then I dare you to get rid of whatever it is that Christ shows you is standing between you and him. And it's not going to be pleasant. It really isn't. And then I dare you to show Christ to others around you. And you know, once Christ has worked in your life, it's a lot easier because you want to. There's a desire. You want to share Christ. And you know what the truth part of this game is? It's Philippians chapter 4 verses 6. You'll be anxious for nothing. You'll have a peace that passes all understanding. You'll have a friend who's closer to you than a brother, and nothing will separate you from the love of God. We read Revelation chapter 3 verses 20. I'll just read it again. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and sup with him, and he with me. You know, Jesus is knocking at the door of all of our hearts today. The question is, do you hear his voice? And are you going to let him in? So I've got two things I'd like to leave you with today. But before I leave it, I'd just like to tell a little story. A few years ago, I was canvassing in Perth, doing the door-to-door, sharing those books with people, and I showed him the cookbook, and he's like, "Oh, I'm not interested, mate. I'm actually dying." And I was like, "Really?" He was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that." And he just started talking, and he said that he's not sure when he's going to die, and he doesn't feel ready to die. And you know, when someone's about to die, a cookbook's probably not really going to do them much good. So I just shared my personal experience, how God's worked in my life, and the peace that I had found from that. And he said, "Oh, I don't know how to pray." I was like, "Well, what if we say a prayer together and we just talk to him like we're talking to a friend? I'll go first and you can go." He's like, "Yeah, no worries." And so I said a prayer, and then he said a prayer. And it was at 6 o'clock, which is when we finish up for the day. And so I had my friends waiting for me, like down the end of the street. I was like, "I just got to pray with this person." So we prayed, and then I said, "Look, you know, you're in my prayers, and you know, I'll see you around." And he's like, "Yeah, no worries." And went back, and then the next day we came back to continue going. And they dropped me back off on my block, and I knocked on his neighbour's door, and she was crying. I was like, "Oh, you know," she just starts tearing. She's like, "Oh, sorry, this isn't a good time. My neighbour died." I was like, "Your neighbour died?" She's like, "Yeah, the guy who lives over there, he died last night." You just never know when someone around you, when it's going to be their last time. So I think when you think about it like that, it just puts a little bit of extra urgency in your heart to share it with the people who are important to you. So I've got two questions to leave you with. What is getting between you and Christ, or between your family and Christ? Question 2 is, what example are we setting to others of what a Christian looks and acts and treats others like? Because, you know, we're the only Bible that most people out there are ever going to read. I hope this story this morning has, I hope this story of how God has saved me, and he woke me up, it was a big wake up, has been an encouragement to you guys. And I just really, really encourage you to ask God to show you what's getting between you and him. No matter where you are in your walk, we can always be closer. And I pray that we will all invite him into our hearts every day, and make him Lord of our life. Thank you very much.